In this video, we will look at wet leasing. Wet leasing is an industry term for a leasing arrangement whereby one airline, the lessor, provides an aircraft, complete crew, maintenance, and insurance, commonly referred to as an ACMI operator, to another airline on a contract basis. Wet leasing is allowed in the domestic and international network and is regulated in Section 1, Scope of the CBA. Wet leasing primarily serves two roles. The first is to supplement company flying during periods of known demand spikes, commonly referred to as peak, the period comprised of the months of November and December. The second is to serve as a short-term stopgap measure to allow the company to manage a temporary spike in demand or a shortage of aircraft, aircrew, or other limitations that may prevent it from operating company aircraft within the domestic or international network. Recall from our previous video that when utilizing Section 1B4 provisions, commonly referred to as belly freight, the company is limited to other operators' schedule, route network, capacity constraints, and other provisions. With wet leasing, on the other hand, the customer, in our case the company, sets as part of the contract the route to be flown, schedule, type of aircraft, and other conditions. It is even common for the ACMI operator performing the flight to utilize the company's call sign when operating flights on behalf of the customer. CBA Section 1B6 regulates wet leasing and sets limits on wet leasing within the domestic network, which, for the purpose of scope, is any flight that operates solely within the contiguous 48 states, and the international network, which is flying that originates, transits, or terminates within the United States or its territories via a location outside of the contiguous 48 states. If these limits are exceeded, then the company must pay the association a penalty utilizing a formula detailed in the CBA. Penalties can be triggered in three ways. First, by utilizing wet leases to replace historical FedEx flying. Second, by wet leasing more than the net gain of trunk aircraft in a year. And third, by exceeding the bid period limitation. At the end of the calendar year, the company calculates the penalties, and they are then reviewed by the association. Once both parties are in agreement, the penalty is paid to the union and then distributed to the pilots. Some penalties are calculated based on block hours, while other penalties are calculated to approximate lost wages, in credit hours, as if the wet leased flights had been operated as trips flown by Seniority List pilots under CBA rules. Depending on the type of penalty, it will be based on average or top-of-scale pay rates. It is important to emphasize that excess wet lease penalties can stack on top of each other. One wet lease contract can generate multiple penalties simultaneously. These penalties are designed to discourage the company from engaging in long-term wet leases that could potentially negatively impact Master Seniority List flying. If the limits on penalty-free wet leasing continue to be exceeded, the penalties become progressively more expensive with the goal of incentivizing the company to shift this growing demand to company aircraft operated by Master Seniority List pilots. Therefore, it is important to note that wet leasing is designed to be short-term in nature and should not be considered a long-term solution to manage increased demand. The CBA also provides for certain scenarios in which the company can engage in penalty-free wet leasing. For example, if it lacks regulatory approval to operate a certain route, or if the shipment configuration cannot fit on company aircraft, or if there is some sort of emergency that precludes the use of company aircraft. In all these cases, the union must be informed of the type of contract entered into, the routes flown, and the impact to company crew members. Let's look at the following examples to better illustrate these provisions. The company has planned for demand throughout the fiscal year and is properly staffed for the normal fluctuations in demand of said year. As peak approaches, they start to notice an increase in demand in a certain international market that will necessitate an increase in flying that cannot be covered by company aircraft. They contract an ACMI operator to fly certain routes within the domestic network to free larger company aircraft for the increased international demand. After notifying the association and running the required analysis, it is deemed that no penalty is due because the wet lease contract did not exceed the two-bid period limit. Now let's look at another example. The company has secured a large contract with a new customer and it will take at least half a year to ramp up company operations to meet this new demand. However, the customer insists on starting as soon as feasible. The company enters into a 6-month wet lease agreement with an ACMI carrier and notifies the association. However, due to delays in aircraft deliveries and training, the company extends the contract to a total of 9 months. At the end of the calendar year, it is determined that the limits were exceeded, and a penalty is due to the association. After both parties agree on the penalty amount, the money is distributed to the union and subsequently to the pilots. Finally, the company secures a contract to ship parts to an aerospace company, and it is asked by the customer to ship a satellite that, upon review, will not fit in the largest aircraft in our fleet. The company contracts an ACMI carrier that operates larger aircraft to complete this delivery. After notifying the association, it is determined that no penalty is due, since the shipment configuration would not fit in company aircraft. This concludes our review of the scope section. We thank you for your attention, and as always, feel free to reach out through the DART system if you have any questions or comments.